Do you have poor heat, or does it seem your truck doesn't ever warm up at all? It could be as simple as worn thermostats. If you have a truck that's not coming up to temp, one of the easiest things you can do to find it is use a type of gauge or scan tool or something along that will read digital engine temperature. The Duramax engine uses 2 thermostats to control water temperature, and they will not begin to open until water temperature is 180 degrees. When they are closed, coolant is forced back into the engine to help bring the engine up to temperature faster. When the thermostats are in the closed position, there is a rubber seal that actually makes the seal. If that seal is deteriorated, even with the thermostat closed, the coolant will still flow. Because the coolant is not held in the engine never fully comes up to temperature. Not only can this result in poor heat output in the cab, but it'll also affect fuel economy as well. There's not really a set maintenance interval for thermostats, so it's good practice just to consider replacing them anytime the cooling system is opened up for service, especially if the engine has over 100,000 miles. The first thing we've done on our truck is check the coolant temp with that digital readout like we talked about earlier. We can see it's only about 158 degrees after a good test drive. So to start the repair, we'll start by draining the coolant. One of the nice things that most people might not know on the GM Classic trucks is the hood has a service position. If you remove the upper bolt from the spring on the hood and just raise the hood up and install it in the lower hole on the hood gets up out of the way so you can have plenty of room to work. We're going to remove the resonator, and then we'll disconnect the wiring at the AC compressor. Then we're going to remove the serpentine belt, loosen the tensioner, and slip the belt off of the AC compressor. Remove the 4 bolts holding the AC compressor down, and then we're going to swing the AC compressor over and set it on the passenger side battery. Just be careful if you have a top post that nothing gets grounded out. Next, remove the resonator wiring harness bracket where the wiring is. Then we're going to remove the oil fill tube. A couple bolts hold this in. Once the bolts are removed, just grab a hold of it and pull it out. Disconnect the coolant temp sensor and remove the bolts into the thermostat housing and the upper radiator pipe as shown. I'm going to stuff a rag in here just in case there's any residual coolant that might be in the thermostat housing, just so it doesn't drop into the engine. Use a screwdriver, just pop the seal on the thermostats. It might take a little wiggling, and then the housing will pull off the upper radiator pipe, leaving the thermostats. Remove the thermostats. We're not going to need these ones anymore. Also, remove the O-ring seal off the upper radiator pipe. We're going to put a new one on. Here is our new thermostats ready to go in. Notice one of them has bleed holes in it. The bleed holes will go on the rearward position with the bleed holes facing the back of the engine as shown. We can install our new upper radiator pipe seal at this time. And then just using some Scotch-Brite or a very fine grit sandpaper, we're just going to clean up the bottom of the thermostat housing. A little bit of dielectric grease inside the thermostat housing will help the radiator pipe seal slip on a little easier. Slide it on, line up the holes, and then reinstall all the bolts. The bolts get tightened down and torqued to spec. In this case, we're at 18 foot-pounds on the thermostat housing. Reinstall the coolant temp sensor plug, remove the rag, and reinstall the oil fill tube. The bolts go back in and get snugged up. Now we can swing over the AC compressor, lining it back up, reinstall the mounting bolts, and tighten them down. Plug in the AC connections, and then install the bracket for the wiring and resonator cover. Your truck may not have this. Then loosen the tensioner and slip the serpentine belt back on. When refilling the coolant on the Duramax, on the top of the thermostat housing there's another bolt. This is actually a bleed port. Remove that bleeder screw completely. You'll notice on the bottom of that is a small felt or rubber washer. I'm going to reinstall the radiator drain plug, we'll refill the truck with fresh coolant. In this case, we're using Dexcool. As soon as you see coolant coming out of that bleed hole, go ahead and reinstall the bolt. Tighten it down to 18 foot-pounds. Now the cooling system has been bled. Reinstall the resonator, and the job is complete. Also, make sure that the coolant that may have spilled out around the bleed port, just wash that off so it doesn't contaminate the belt. The hood goes back down, a test drive, and then we notice our coolant temp is back up to operating range at 180 degrees.